Good morning, holy greetings, and Happy New Year to everyone who has joined us for our morning worship services here at the Main Street Church of God in Christ in the city of Pine Bluff, Arkansas, where our wonderful anointed pastor is Administrative Assistant Elder Brandon Clay. We are so excited to have you with us today. As I am sure you know, tomorrow, Monday, January the 15th, is designated as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Therefore, we want to acknowledge and appreciate him during our worship services with a brief presentation on this morning. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January the 15th, 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia, the middle child of Reverend Martin Luther King Sr. and Mrs. Alberta King. As a young man, Dr. King had an insatiable thirst for knowledge. Throughout his academic career, he maintained an exceptionally high scholastic standing. His brilliance enabled him to skip 3 grades and enter Morehouse College in 1944 at the age of 15. After receiving a Bachelor of Arts degree in sociology from Morehouse College at the age of 19, he followed in his father's footsteps. And in 1951, he graduated with an A average from Crozer Theological Seminary in Chester, Pennsylvania, with a Bachelor of Divinity degree. Dr. King later became an ordained minister, and by 1955, he had completed his dissertation in philosophy and was awarded a PhD from Boston University. In 1953, Dr. King's father officiated at his marriage to Coretta Scott. The couple later had 4 children: Yolanda Denise, Martin Luther III, Dexter Scott, and Bernice Albertine. Dr. King was his father's assistant pastor at the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta and eventually became the full-time pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. Dr. King's rise to national prominence began in December 1955 in Montgomery, Alabama, when a black lady, Mrs. Rosa Parks, said, "I will not go to the back of the bus." For refusing to relinquish her seat to a white man, Mrs. Parks was put in jail. Word of her arrest traveled all over Montgomery, and within 5 days, the Montgomery Improvement Association was formed with Dr. King as president. To bring about a change in a long-standing practice, Dr. King advised the people not to ride the Montgomery buses. A boycott was organized, and for over a year, 381 days, blacks picketed white businesses and refused to use public transportation. The cohesiveness of blacks during this crisis resulted in a 1956 U.S. Supreme Court decision declaring Alabama's bus segregation laws unconstitutional. During the interim, Dr. King and his followers suffered undue harassment. Dr. King was arrested for staging an illegal boycott. When the boycott ended, Dr. King was among the first to board the newly desegregated buses. This victory established him as a prominent civil rights leader and spokesman for the masses of black people. Shortly thereafter, with a group of Southern ministers, Dr. King organized the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to further advance black equality. Dr. King led nonviolent demonstrations for open housing, jobs, and educational opportunities for blacks across the nation. He also spoke out against the war in Vietnam. When Dr. King preached love for the oppressor, walking hand in hand with poor and abused, people grew to love and respect him, and thousands flocked to him in support of the black causes. Realizing that the civil rights movement was behind them, college students united and started read-ins in public libraries, wade-ins in municipal swimming pools, sit-ins at lunch counters, and stand-in in movie theaters. In 1960, it was reported that the NAACP spent 40% of its annual budget toward the defense of nearly 2,000 student protesters awaiting trial. Although Dr. King walked in a godly way and preached love for his fellow man, the blood of black and white Americans once again soaked the flag of democracy. Civil rights leaders were assassinated systematically. College students were murdered and secretly buried. Little children were victims of bombings in southern black churches. And this I know about because when the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama was bombed on September the 15th, 1963, and 4 little girls were killed, one of those girls was my niece, Denise McNair. Peaceful demonstrators were harassed by policemen with fire hoses. German Shepherd dogs that were trained to kill were unleashed against the peaceful marchers. Dr. King himself was brutalized and arrested more than 30 times. His home was bombed, and his life and those of his family was threatened. He and 16 other Southern Christian Leadership Conference members were arrested for staging an eat-in in an exclusive restaurant in St. Augustine, Florida, and were charged with violating Florida's unwanted guest law. On another occasion, Dr. King was sent to a Georgia state prison, which resulted in a national outcry from the American people. In times of crisis, Dr. King never lost sight of his dream for his commitment to nonviolence. "Let no man drag you so low as to hate," he would say. Along with a strong belief in the doctrine of Christianity, Dr. King held the teachings of nonviolence as taught by Mahatma Gandhi in high regard. He pleaded with the blacks to seek not to satisfy their thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. In 1963, Dr. King and other black leaders organized one of the greatest demonstrations in the history of the nation, which was held on August the 28th, 1963, the March on Washington. He spoke to a crowd of over 250,000 people, dramatizing the shameful plight of black Americans for over 100 years since the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. Standing before the Lincoln Memorial, Dr. King gave his most eloquent speech, "I Have a Dream," which later touched the lives of every American. He stated that 100 years later, blacks still are not free. Their lives are still crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. Blacks live on a lonely island of poverty in the middle of a vast ocean of material prosperity. He further said, "Now is the time for America to make good her real promise of democracy for all of her children." In 1964, Dr. King watched as President Lyndon B. Johnson signed a comprehensive civil rights bill which had been submitted previously by President John F. Kennedy. Dr. King's last demonstration was on March the 28th, 1968, when he led more than 6,000 protesters through downtown Memphis, Tennessee, in support of a sanitation workers' strike. On April the 3rd, 1968, at Mason Temple Church of God in Christ, Dr. King delivered his last speech. I have been to the mountaintop. Mason Temple Church of God in Christ, that is the international headquarters for the Church of God in Christ. On the very next day, April the 4th, 1968, Dr. King was assassinated as he stood on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. He was survived by his wife, Coretta Scott King, 4 children, both his parents, a sister, and a brother. His funeral services at the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta were attended by thousands, including national and state officials and many entertainers. For his outstanding contributions, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. received more than 300 honors and awards. In 1964, he and Mrs. King traveled to Sweden, and he received the world's highest honor, the Nobel Peace Prize, being the youngest to ever receive this award. Dr. King kept the plaque, but he donated the accompanying $54,000 to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference while furthering the movement. Time magazine named him Man of the Year, and the NAACP awarded him the Spielgren Medal. Stride Toward Freedom, Strength to Love, and Where Do We Go From Here are a few of the books that Dr. King authored. In 1968, an Arabian state issued the first postage stamp in Dr. King's honor. Since that time, more than 22 countries have honored him with stamps, and the United States Postal Service has issued over 200,000 commemorative stamps. In 1977, 9 years after his death, the United States honored him with the nation's highest civilian award, the Medal of Freedom. January 1986 marked the beginning of the official national observance of Dr. King's birthday. Dr. King Jr. left this comforting message with his people. We as a people will get to the promised land. Representative John Connors, a Democrat from Michigan, Senator Edward Brooke, a Republican from Massachusetts, introduced a bill in Congress to make Dr. King's birthday a national holiday. The bill first came to a vote with the United States House of Representatives in 1979. It was finally approved as a national holiday in 1983. The holiday was first observed in January 1986. However, the holiday was finally recognized by all 50 states for the first time in the year 2000. The King holiday is observed on the third Monday in January every year. Thank you for being with us today. I hope we have said something that will encourage you to stay in touch with your Black heritage and to remember the works and sacrifice of Dr. King for all of Blacks. Thank you, and God bless you.